Hey everybody, and welcome to a wrap-up. So we are wrapping up the month of December at this point in time. It is a blast from the past for me because we are April at the moment in which I'm filming this, and in which you will be seeing this hopefully. Normally this video is supposed to go live in a few days time because I've unfortunately gotten rid of my entire sort of like progress. That's not what I want to say, right? Because I've unfortunately gotten behind on all of my head start that I had on my content, so now I have to film and edit quickly in order to have some videos that can go up again and not ruin my streak, and not ruin the streak that I currently have going on. But so, month of December was also the second round of my readathon, game nightathon, and in December we had the lottery edition of this readathon, which meant that basically you are reading prompts based on certain numbers, and those numbers are basically sort of the numbers that you're entering into the lottery, and then at the end of the month the numbers are drawn and it's basically a game of chance. I don't actually remember the prompts anymore for these books because of how long I've waited with all of this, but we're gonna try and recreate at least my experience with these books because for some of them that might also be a little bit difficult. The first book that I finished in December was Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro. I read this one in the original Spanish, so I read Elena Sabe. So this is a book that I read for my 5 stars or 5 books vlog, and it's one of those for which I really struggled a lot with my rating afterwards because I was struggling with the idea of like, am I giving it a higher rating because I want this vlog concept to be successful, or is it just really a 5-star read? And reading in Spanish does not help with that concept neither, because then, you know, I feel like I might also feel to some extent that I didn't like fully grasp every single minute of it, and so maybe I feel like I'm not, like I didn't understand it to a good enough degree to be able to say that it's a 5-star read. But with Elena Knows, I definitely can tell you guys that this is a book about a woman who has Parkinson's disease, I think it was, right? Or Alzheimer's, no, Parkinson's, I believe, right? She has Parkinson's disease, and her daughter has just been found dead. And everybody's trying to convince her that her daughter committed suicide. However, she cannot accept this reality, and so she's trying to set out on her own to do her own sort of investigation into her daughter's murder to try and figure out what actually happened. But because of the severity of her condition, it takes her a lot of time and effort to be able to even get up out of the chair. And so my favorite parts about this book are definitely the descriptions of her dealing with her illness and the sort of like slow descriptions of how she just has to like will her body to do certain things, this sort of calculation that needs to go into when she's taking her medication in order to be able to then take those steps out of the door, the way that she's navigating her world, even though she basically barely has any visibility because of the fact that she cannot lift her head very high, which, to be fair, for me is also kind of triggering to some extent, because this is also something that I kind of somewhat fear that is in my future at one point or another, that my neck muscles might not be strong enough because I'm already like hunched a little bit because of my muscular dystrophy. And I know that my grandmother, for example, was really very hunched by the end of her life. So that definitely, to me, of course, has a different little bit of a different impact than it would for any other type of reader. But I just really thought it was a great, strong piece of literature that I definitely want to be reading other works by Claudia Pinheiro, because I thought the way in which it was all described was just really, like, it really worked well for me. It was really like, and also for the Spanish, it was really quite doable for me in this Spanish. I thought it was very clear, precise, and easy for me to follow. So I really had a great time with this one, and I don't know, it didn't feel fully like, oh my god, I'm obsessed with this book now, 5-star, but I still think that it's at the very least like super close to that 5-star level. The next thing I finished is a book that I actually have a video for this that is now sort of on the shelf because I don't remember anything about this. This is Starling House by Alex E. the Harrow. This is the Illumicrate edition. It's super shiny, so I have to like hold it in the right position, I guess. But so I have an Illumicrate vlog normally for this, so I did the unboxing of this box, and then I was going to give my thoughts about this book in the sort of like second vlog section, but I never did that, and now it's been so long that I'm just like, I don't know what this book is about anymore. I mean, I know what it is about. So we are following this girl who has basically been bringing up her brother on her own because her mother tragically passed away a few years ago. And in this town, there's this sort of like mysterious house referred to as Starling House. And she feels like an unnatural draw to this property. And then now she is working in a bar, but like one day on her way home or something, she feels a draw to Starling House and is kind of approaching the gates when the owner of the house kind of tells her like, stay away, don't come back. But of course she does come back. This one also has a sentient house, which I really enjoy, but aside from that, a lot of it has really disappeared from my mind. I know that there's this sort of like, you know, like reluctant relationship between the owner of the house and her. He doesn't really want to draw closer to her. He wants her to steer clear of this house because apparently it's dangerous for her to be in this house. And he clearly knows more things about that than she does, but then the house kind of really wants them to be together, to connect to one another. And then there are this sort of organization or whatever, which is trying to get her to get to the secrets of this property, and it's kind of like blackmailing her, trying to make sure that like her brother gets into a good school if she cooperates and stuff like that. But I really have forgotten a lot about this, and as a consequence I cannot really say what my experience with this was. It's a book that has definitely not lingered in my mind. I don't think it was a overwhelmingly like great experience while reading it neither. I think it was just like middle of the road to me, but yeah, that's all I can give you guys. I'm sorry. Next up we have, of course, the book that is at the bottom of my pile here. And that is Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tabada. I believe this was also in that vlog. Not entirely sure anymore now whether that was in that 5-star blog. But this is a sci-fi book, I guess, to some extent, about a future in which you know, climate change has like ruined our Earth to some extent, and there are certain civilizations which are now like not part of our world anymore. And so we are following one woman who is the only person left who knows the Japanese language. But then she hears somebody on the radio speaking a language that might be her language, and then it is a story which we're following, I think, like 4 perspectives which intermingle at certain points of time, which is something that I really enjoy. I really enjoy separate storylines coming together at points in time. But with this one, first of all, don't remember anything. Remember that it was quite a struggle to get through. The writing style didn't fully work for me, and I've forgotten everything else about it. So unfortunately, not a big success. Then we have, is this a reread? Yes, right? This is my final reread of King's Dark Tidings for for the series. That sentence went nowhere. So this is my reread of Kingdoms and Chaos, the 4th book in King's Dark Tidings by Kel Cates. So I was rereading the series for the past 4 months in 2023 in order to then in the first 2 months of 2024 be able to go into the new books that were released in this world. Kingdoms and Chaos, because it's the 4th book in a series, cannot really say too much about it, except that the first time that I read it, I know that I was quite disappointed in it, and I'm happy to say that now, having listened to the audio for it, that is definitely not the case anymore. And so it can definitely be that like the problem was, as I originally was expecting, was that the 4th book is the only one that I read physically, whereas all the others I had listened to the audiobook. And so that audiobook is just, it's really amazing. I really enjoyed the voice actor for the audiobooks, the narrator for the audiobooks. And you know, this 4th book definitely grew in my appreciation as a consequence of listening to the audiobook this time around. I really enjoy these stories, I really enjoy these characters. It's really just a fun, quick read for me. And so yeah, with this series, this is a series in which we're following Reskin, who as a young boy he's dropped off in a fortress where he's being trained throughout his childhood to become the ultimate warrior. Basically, he is trained in all possible military skills, but he's also taught strategy, how to impersonate royals and stuff like that, how to infiltrate in certain fortresses, the layout of all of the fortresses. So what his real goal is, nobody really has ever informed him of, and he will end up not finding out because his masters end up being killed or dying before they're able to communicate his goal to him. And so he sets out into the world without really knowing what he's intended to do, and without ever having really been trained on what it means to be a human, or on how to make decisions for himself, or on how to make goals for himself, how to make friendships, relationships. And so it's a fun ride. It has a lot of sort of miscommunication, but miscommunication that I like because of that concept of him not really understanding social cues. So the miscommunication comes from him not understanding any of the social behaviors that most people naturally pick up on during their childhoods. So it's not like miscommunication that's there just to create drama. It is part of the essence of who Reskin is as a character. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one a whole ton, and so happy that I had that reread in 2023. Then I listened to a ton of Murderbot towards the end, or like just the second half, I guess, of the December month. So I'm not gonna talk about these individually because I don't really remember these books individually, but I will say I have a great time with Murderbots in the moment, but I will say that I kind of feel like they kind of disappear from my mind afterwards, and so I really would like to maybe physically reread the series when I'm done with like the most recent installments, just to be sure, because there are certain elements that do build off of the previous works. For the most part, I feel like you can enjoy them in and of themselves, but there are certain elements that reach back and that build over time, and so I feel like I'm kind of lost with that world building from time to time. But so I read All Systems Red, Artificial Condition, and Rogue Protocol, and maybe even before the end of the month. Yeah, before the end of the month I also still finished the fourth book, Exit Strategy. So all of these range within like the 4-star to 4.5-star ratio when it comes to my enjoyment of them. Next up we have, on a very different side of the scale of my enjoyment, we get to a book that I read in 2 forms, and I was reading them more or less simultaneously. And that is the original No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai, and then the manga adaptation by Junji Ito, No Longer Human. Yeah, I did not like this. So, No Longer Human is the story of a young man going into adulthood who basically, his main issue is that he is a people pleaser and he cannot disappoint people for the life of him. You know, he cannot handle disappointment or saying no, going against people in his life. And so when he goes to university, for example, he falls in with this guy who really takes advantage of this, and he's always the one paying for drinking and stuff like that. And so he quickly develops toxic habits when it comes to money, alcohol consumption and stuff like that. But the main issue for me personally in this book is his treatment of women, because he automatically kind of falls into a lot of relationships, and a lot of bad relationships, and relationships that he isn't necessarily all that invested in, because he basically just kind of falls into them because he doesn't say no, you know. And but as a consequence of his sort of like lackluster involvement, these relationships can become quite tragic. They can be very toxic, and not just on the side of you know, the woman being more invested in him, or the woman extorting him or something like that. His behavior to the women can also be really horrible at times, and you know, it's just a type of character that was super frustrating, that I wanted to just like be able to shake and be like, you know, you're way of avoiding conflict is basically just creating much more conflict than if you were to actually just be like, no, I'm not interested or anything like that. And yeah, the story doesn't change in the manga. So the manga, I mean, it was the same story, the same frustration that I had with that. Yes, it is. It does have definitely sort of like really beautiful art in it in the manga form, but yeah, this character was just a character that I absolutely loathed, and to some extent I can recognize myself in that character, which is even worse. Because I am absolutely a conflict avoider, and so I'm like, wait, no, I don't want to be this person, so hopefully I'll never end up being that person. But yeah, this is like 2 star, 2.5 star. Is this character intentionally like this? Maybe, but yeah, I couldn't, it was just more frustrating than it was enjoyable for me. Then we have a book that I ended up DNFing, which I should have done with No Longer Human as well, and that is Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop by Hwang Boryum. So this is a book that is definitely also doing the rounds on BookTube at this point in time, and this, what I expected this to be, is just like a wholesome slice of life book about a bookstore, and that is what you get to some extent. But yeah, this is way too big for what it is. I would have loved to see this edited down to a whole lot more, and it just really didn't work for me. This is about a woman who owns a bookshop, and I thought it was going to be more like focused on her and the relationship with, kind of with like the person who's doing the barista side of things, but a lot of it is also just like transcripts of lectures that authors come to give within the bookshop, transcriptions of the stories that the conversations she's having with people who visit the bookshop, which that definitely is something that I expected it to be, but it's kind of like living in a bookshop 24/7, and just writing down everything that happens there, which turns out to be more boring than a book girly like me would think it is. But yeah, mainly the sort of like interviews with authors and stuff like that really just took the enjoyment out of this for me. And so at one point in time I just had to be like, okay, this is not going to change, this is definitely going to stay the way that it currently is, and I'm not enjoying myself enough with that to continue. I don't know if you can hear the dog howling above me. Hopefully not. Alright, 2 books to go. One of them is my final 5 star for 2024. No, 2023. Alright, so second to last book I finished, What You're Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, and this is what I wanted Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop to be. So this is a wholesome story featuring literature that does exactly what I wanted it to do. So this is a Japanese book, and in this one we are looking at basically sort of like neighborhood library. We don't center the library. We are basically, this is a collection of, so let's say 4 short stories more or less, which we're following 4 different people who at one point in time in their short story will end up going to this local community center library because they need sort of like help with their life goal and figuring out how to make that happen. And there's sort of like a super librarian who manages to give them the great books that will help them along their path, but she also always puts in sort of like one quirky recommendation that has sort of like nothing to do with what they ask of her, but which always turns out to be like exactly the book that they need. So really enjoyed this one. This is not the type of book that, you know, in 20 years will be like my favorite book of all time or anything like that, but it's just so wholesome and exactly what I needed and exactly what I expect of a book like this, that, you know, it gets that 5-star rating. It was definitely what I needed at the time in which I was reading this book, definitely what I expected out of it, and just a perfect execution for this type of book. And then the final thing I read this month is also something I DNF'd, right? I know I finished it apparently. Wow, good on me, but I should have DNF'd. And that is Strangers I Know by Claudia Durastanti. And I will tell you, I don't know this book anymore. So this is a book about a girl whose parents are deaf, but she is not. And that is all I can tell you about it, because that's the synopsis I've given 20,000 times when talking about this book before I'd read it. And after having read it, that's still all I really know about this. And yeah, was this in my 5-star rating vlog? No, right? Yeah, this was just a disappointment. The writing style, I think, mainly was the issue for me, that it just like didn't grab my attention, and so it was a struggle for me to get through it, and as a consequence I wasn't actually really grasping anything that I was reading. I was just like reading words in order to be continuing on in the story, but not really consuming the story. So if I find myself in these situations, I should just put these books down, because clearly after a while it's as if I haven't read them, because you know, this book has lingered in no way or shape in my mind. Let me now just still check whether I also DNF'd anything in that month. Yeah, so the only DNF was the one that I already talked about. So yeah, that's it for the December wrap up, meaning the end of the month the number should have ended up with a TBR of 23 books, because I went into 2024 with 23 books left. I believe so, right? Think so, should be. So that means the month of December, I don't know, I think it was pretty disappointing month, in the sense that a lot of them were just like disappointing middle of the road things. I think the biggest like success stories here is my reread of Kingdoms and Chaos, which I had kind of like mediocre experiences with the first time around, and really enjoyed a lot when I reread it. My 5-star read, of course, what you're looking for, is in the library, and then the joy that I got out of listening to Murder Bots. But so yeah, most of the reading for this month was middle of the road, DNFs, should have DNF'd. So let's go on to next month's and hope for better reading.